Before we get into today's story, I want you to do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel out, and that way you won't miss any of the stories we have coming up. Now, with that out of the way, let me tell you what happened. The weight of the frosting was the first thing I registered. It was heavy, cloyingly sweet, and instantly blinding. One moment, I was standing beside my son, Leo, and his new bride, Tiffany, beaming with a pride that felt almost too big for my chest. The next, a roar of laughter erupted as my face was plunged into the top tier of their $5,000 wedding cake. My hands flew up, not in anger, but in sheer disbelieving shock. I felt a chunk of lemon chiffon dislodge and slide down the collar of my custom-tailored suit. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Tiffany's shrill, triumphant laugh. "Oh my God, Dad! Lighten up! It's a wedding tradition!" she shrieked, clapping her hands together as if she'd just performed the most brilliant comedic routine of all time. I saw my son, my only child, Leo, standing there with a weak, uncertain smile plastered on his face, a puppet caught between the woman he just married and the father who had given him everything. He didn't move to help me. He didn't say a word. He just watched. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of sugar and the sound of mockery, a lifetime of love and sacrifice curdled into something cold and hard in my gut. They thought this was funny. They thought my humiliation was a spectator sport. They had no idea that their little joke had just cost them their entire future. I wiped a smear of buttercream from my eye, my expression utterly blank. It took me approximately 7 minutes to walk from the ruined cake table to the quiet solitude of the men's restroom. And in those 7 minutes, a plan, fully formed and ruthlessly efficient, crystallized in my mind. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady, and sent a 2-word text to my lawyer. It simply said, "Execute Alpha." Let me give you some context, because this wasn't about a piece of cake. It was never about the cake. It was about a pattern of disrespect so profound, so deeply ingrained, that this public humiliation was merely the final, ugly flourish on a masterpiece of entitlement. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 10 years ago. She was the light of my life, and when she was gone, all that light focused on our son, Leo. I sold my tech company for a sum that would ensure neither my son nor his children, nor their children, would ever have to worry about money. But I never told them the full extent of it. I saw what new money did to young people, how it corroded their ambition and warped their perspective. So I raised them with the values Eleanor and I shared: hard work, humility, and respect. I lived in the same comfortable but modest house we'd bought 30 years ago. I drove a reliable 10-year-old sedan. I wanted Leo to believe we were comfortable, not fabulously wealthy. I wanted him to build something for himself. When he graduated from college, he came to me with a business plan, a boutique marketing firm. It was a decent idea, but he had no capital. I agreed to fund it, not as a gift, but as a formal investment. I set up a corporation, made myself the 90% silent partner, and drew up a loan agreement for the seed money, with strict repayment terms. He saw it as his dad helping him out. I saw it as a teaching opportunity, a safety net he didn't know was also a cage. The business did reasonably well, mostly because my network of old colleagues threw him a few lucrative contracts as a favor to me. He, of course, believed it was all due to his own genius. Then came Tiffany. She was beautiful, ambitious, and had an appetite for luxury that was voracious. She saw Leo's budding success and my quiet, unassuming lifestyle and drew her own conclusions. She believed Leo was the rainmaker, and I was the out-of-touch old man clinging to my pension. She subtly, and then not so subtly, began to mock my frugality. My car was vintage in a way that wasn't cool. My house was cozy, but needed a complete teardown. My suits were, in her words, adorably dated. Leo, desperate to impress her, started spending lavishly. Suddenly, his business profits were funding a lifestyle far beyond its means. The fancy dinners, the designer clothes, the exotic vacations. I knew, because I saw the quarterly reports, that the business was barely breaking even. The money he was spending was the capital I had invested. He was draining his own future to impress a woman who valued him only for his wallet. The proposal was a grand, over-the-top affair on a yacht I later discovered was chartered using funds earmarked for employee bonuses. When they announced their engagement, I was happy for my son, but a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Tiffany's vision for the wedding was something out of a celebrity magazine. The venue, the dress, the guest list, it was all about appearances. The budget she presented to me was astronomical. When I gently suggested they scale it back, perhaps save for a down payment on a house, she gave me a pitying look. "Oh, Dad," she'd said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Don't you worry your little head about that. Leo's got it covered. His company is doing amazing things." I knew for a fact his company had just lost its biggest client, but I just nodded and smiled. The issue of the house came next. Tiffany had found her dream home. It was a sprawling, modern monstrosity in a gated community, complete with an infinity pool and a 6-car garage. The price tag was staggering. Leo came to me, cap in hand, full of vague promises about a huge deal that was about to close. He asked me to co-sign the mortgage. I refused. His face fell, and I saw the flicker of anger in Tiffany's eyes as she stood behind him. Instead, I made them a different offer. "I'll buy the house for you," I said. Their eyes lit up. "It will be my wedding gift." Tiffany practically vibrated with excitement. But there was a condition. "The deed," I said calmly, "will remain in my name for 5 years. Think of me as your landlord, but with no rent. If you can manage the upkeep, the taxes, and the insurance on your own for that period, I'll sign it over to you, free and clear. It's a test of your financial responsibility." They saw it as an eccentric old man's quirk, a formality. They eagerly agreed, not hearing the warning in my words. They didn't understand. It wasn't a gift, it was a leash. The car was a similar story. Tiffany decided her current convertible wasn't making the right statement. She wanted a top-of-the-line Range Rover. Again, Leo's business couldn't possibly afford it. I stepped in and leased the vehicle for them. The paperwork was all in my name. Another leash. Finally, there was the trust. My final gift to Eleanor was a promise that I would always look after our boy. I had established an irrevocable trust fund for Leo on his 21st birthday. It contained a fortune that would dwarf everything else. However, my lawyers, bless their cynical hearts, had insisted on a specific provision, a character and conduct clause. It gave me, as the sole trustee, the discretion to restrict or freeze distributions if the beneficiary engaged in behavior that was deemed morally reprehensible, brought dishonor to the family name, or demonstrated a profound lack of judgment. At the time, I thought it was an absurdly dramatic and unnecessary piece of legal boilerplate. It turned out to be the most important sentence in the entire document. So, you see, as I stood in that restroom, looking at my frosting-covered reflection in the mirror, I wasn't an embarrassed old man. I was a puppeteer who had just watched his puppets gleefully try to set him on fire. They thought they held all the cards. They thought my love was unconditional and my resources were a bottomless well for their whims. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness for the very last time. Execute Alpha was the prearranged code I had established with my lawyer, David, months ago. We had a Sunday morning golf game every week, and I had been confiding in him about my growing concerns. David was old school, sharp as a tack, and had zero tolerance for spoiled brats. Together, we had prepared a series of legal actions, a nuclear option to be deployed only in the worst-case scenario. I had never imagined I would actually use it, but as I cleaned my face with rough paper towels, the laughter from the reception hall still echoing in my ears, I felt no anger, no sadness. Just a profound, chilling sense of clarity. The line had been crossed. The lesson I had tried so hard to teach my son about character was now going to be delivered in a language he and his new wife would finally understand, the language of consequences. I composed myself, straightened my tie, and walked back out to the reception. I didn't say a word. I found my table, picked up my glass of water, and waited. The band started playing. Leo and Tiffany had their first dance. They floated across the floor, bathed in spotlights, looking for all the world like the king and queen of their own perfect universe. They glanced over at me, Tiffany with a smirk, Leo with a fleeting look of something that might have been guilt before it was swallowed by the adoration in his wife's eyes. They had no idea that their universe was already imploding. They were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, and I was the one who had just pulled the plug. I stayed for another hour, a silent observer at the gaudy spectacle I had paid for. I spoke to old friends. I accepted sympathies from relatives who looked at me with a mixture of pity and outrage on my behalf. To each of them, I just smiled and said, "Kids will be kids then," without a word to the happy couple. I slipped out the door and drove home. The next morning, I woke up early, made a pot of coffee, and sat on my back porch, watching the sunrise. The world felt quiet, settled. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was David. "Morning," he said, his voice crisp. "Phase 1 is complete. The eviction notice was served by a court-martial at 8 a.m. They have 30 days to vacate your property. The notice cites breach of the verbal agreement regarding respectful conduct toward the owner. It's thin, but it's legal, and it gets the ball rolling." I thanked him. An hour later, another update. Phase 2. I've sent a formal demand letter to your son's company, calling in the full, outstanding balance of the startup loan due to financial mismanagement. As a majority shareholder, I've also called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. The agenda is the immediate dissolution of the CEO's employment contract. I took a sip of coffee. The sun was higher in the sky now. At noon, David called again. Phase 3. The leasing company was delighted to hear you be terminating the agreement early. They've dispatched a repossession agent. The Range Rover should be gone within the hour. And finally, he said, with a hint of satisfaction in his voice, I have drafted and sent, via registered mail, a formal notice to Mr. Leo Sterling, informing him that his access to the Eleanor Sterling Trust has been indefinitely suspended pending a review, as per the Character and Conduct Clause, Section 4, Subsection B. I cited today's date and the public, deliberate act of disrespect against the trustee as the primary cause. The silence on my end was filled with the chirping of birds in my yard. "Thank you, David," I said. "Send me your bill." The rest of the day was quiet. I read a book. I did some gardening. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The toxicity that had been slowly seeping into my life was being surgically removed. The inevitable confrontation came just after 5 p.m. I heard a car screech to a halt in my driveway, followed by slamming doors. The doorbell rang, not once, but in a long, frantic series of buzzes. I opened the door to find Leo and Tiffany standing on my porch. They looked like they had been through a war. Tiffany's face was a mask of furious disbelief, her perfect wedding makeup smeared from crying or rage, probably both. Leo just looked lost, his eyes wide with panic. "What have you done?" he blurted out, his voice cracking. Tiffany pushed past him. "Your house?" she shrieked, waving a piece of paper in her hand. The eviction notice. "What is the meaning of this? Is this some kind of sick joke? To ruin our honeymoon?" "A joke," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I stepped aside, letting them into the foyer. "I thought you two were the experts on jokes. Like the one you played yesterday with the cake." "That was hilarious." Tiffany's jaw tightened. "That was a prank. This is our life. You're throwing us out of our home." "My home," I corrected her gently. "It was always my home. The arrangement was conditional on a certain level of basic human decency, a condition you failed to meet in the most public way imaginable." Leo finally spoke, his voice pleading. "Dad, please. We're sorry about the cake. It was stupid. Tiffany didn't mean anything by it. But this is insane. I got an email from a bank. They're calling in the business loan. They're firing me. My company," I interjected again with the same cool precision. "I own 90% of the shares, Leo. I funded it. And I will not have my investment portfolio managed by someone with your appalling judgment. You were running it into the ground to pay for her shopping habit anyway. I'm dissolving it and writing it off as a loss. A very expensive lesson." Tiffany let out a gasp. "The car is gone," she wailed. "They just came and took it. They towed my car right out of the driveway." "My car," I said, my eyes locking with hers. "Leased in my name. Paid for by me. A privilege, not a right." and privileges can be revoked. The final blow landed when Leo pulled another letter from his pocket, his hand trembling. The trust. Dad, the lawyer's letter. It says you've frozen the trust. Eleanor's trust. You can't do that. Mom wanted me to have that. That was the moment my calm finally fractured, just for a second. The mention of her name from his lips in this context was a desecration. Your mother, I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense growl, would be ashamed of you. She would be horrified that the son she raised could stand by, smiling, while his wife publicly humiliated his father. That money was meant to secure your future, to give you freedom. It was not meant to fund a lifestyle of shallow materialism and grotesque disrespect. The character clause is clear, and your character has been found wanting. You will not see a single penny from that trust until you demonstrate that you have fundamentally changed as a human being. They stood there, stunned into silence, the full scope of the catastrophe finally dawning on them. Every pillar of their carefully constructed, luxurious world had been kicked out from under them in the space of a few hours. The house, the business, the car, the money, it was all gone. And it had all been mine to begin with. An illusion of wealth they had mistaken for their own. What? Leo whispered, his face pale. Dad, after everything. What? I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger. A weak, entitled stranger who had let a manipulative woman poison his soul. You're asking the wrong question, Leo, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. You shouldn't be asking why I'm doing this. You should be asking why you did what you did. You should have been asking yourself that question when you let Tiffany mock my home. You should have been asking it when you drained your business account for a vacation you couldn't afford. And you definitely should have been asking it yesterday when you stood there and watched your wife smash my face into a cake I paid for, at a wedding I paid for, in front of people I've known my entire life. You never once thought about the consequences of your actions. Now, you will think of nothing else. This is not a punishment. It is a curriculum. Your lesson begins now. They stumbled out the door, defeated. I closed it softly behind them, the click of the latch echoing in the silent house. It was the sound of chapter ending. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. Their world didn't just shrink, it collapsed. They had to move out of my house at the end of the month, into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The business was dissolved. Leo, who had never had to interview for a job in his life, was forced to start from the bottom, sending out resumes, facing rejection. The shame was immense. His friends, who had flocked to his success, vanished as soon as the money dried up. And Tiffany? Her love, it turned out, was directly proportional to Leo's net worth. Without the house, the car, and the endless stream of cash, the cracks in their relationship became chasms. The constant fighting, the blame, the resentment, it was inevitable. I heard from my sister that they separated less than 6 months after the wedding. Tiffany went home to her parents, her dreams of being a tech mogul's wife in ashes. She couldn't handle a life without luxury. She couldn't handle a husband who was just a man, not a provider of status. Leo called me a few times in the beginning. The calls were angry, then pleading, then just sad. I didn't block his number, but I kept my responses brief and unemotional. I told him the path back was long and would be paved with his own actions, not my forgiveness. He had to earn his way back, not just to the money, but to my respect. It's been 2 years now. Leo has a steady job in middle management at a logistics company. He shares a small apartment with a roommate. He takes the bus to work. I hear he started paying back some of the friends he borrowed money from during his downward spiral. He sent me a simple, handwritten card on my birthday last year. It just said, Dad, I'm starting to understand. I'm sorry, it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. I haven't restored the trust. I haven't offered him any financial help. The house was sold. The lesson isn't over yet. Maybe one day, he'll truly become the man his mother and I tried to raise. Maybe not, but he will never again make the mistake of thinking my kindness is a weakness. He will never again forget that actions have consequences. As for me, I have peace. My life is quiet again. I still live in my modest house. I still drive my old car. My wealth is a tool, not a definition of who I am. I've learned a hard lesson. 2. You can give your children everything, but you cannot give them character. They have to build that for themselves. Sometimes the only way they can learn is by having you take away all the props and forcing them to stand on their own 2 feet, even if it means they have to fall first. So what do you think? Was I too harsh? Did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you have a story about entitlement getting its just desserts, I'd love to read it. Thanks for listening.